There's a lot to be gained from saying what people want to hear. People will pay for you to say what they want to hear.
Snoop and Nelly.
Performance at the Liberty Ball for President Donald Trump's inauguration.
The culture is starting to thaw to Donald Trump.
He defended his decision to perform, and he said, regardless of the differences we have, it's all about coming together and being positive.
Doesn't mean I'm particularly interested in what I won't be watching.
People will champion you, but if you actually have a critical relationship with the society where you can point out, this is actually undermining our communities, this is hurting us.
When you sell yourself for a mess of pottage, you know.
New York Times best-selling author and professor of African American Studies, Glaude Jr., explores how everyone can be a leader.
America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils.
Author and professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, the always brilliant Imani Perry. South to America, a journey below the Mason-Dixon to understand the soul of a nation.
How people view the American South. How to move towards freedom.
The biggest challenge for me, and that is the challenge of pessimism.
European empires decided to make this thing called Black. Many of us have spent many years fighting against that category in various ways and differentiating between ourselves. To create beauty in that is actually the highest human achievement. It's not a universalist claim, but it's something about what is so fundamentally human, and that's why the entire world is captivated by our imaginations. Hello. Okay, so I have this question. We're going to start with me asking a question of you.
Sure.
In what ways do you see success, however you would define it, intersecting with identity and advocacy within the context of the Black experience?
Success.
Yeah. Which I guess would demand you answering the question, what constitutes success for you personally?
It's a hard question in some ways, right? Because, you know, success, completing the task, kind of fulfilling one's sense of vocation, right? I suppose I'm more interested in not so much success, but kind of living fully.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that being tied up or bound up with who I take myself to be.
Yeah.
And I think success is so end-oriented in some ways as opposed to process.
Mm-hmm. So would you say then that for you, I mean, you talked about vocation and who you take yourself to be, that these things are not distinguishable, right? So the work on behalf of the people is actually the measure.
For me, right? So there's always the kind of individual goals and tasks and things that are in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a sense of calling, a sense of vocation as constitutive of who you take yourself to be, success is not really the aim or the ambition, right? It's how does one live fully that vocation on behalf of the people you care most about, right? So part of what I'm trying to do is resist what oftentimes gets read in market terms, right? A life that's meaningful is tied or bound up with, success. Right? And, Cornel West used to make this distinction that I thought, which was so powerful. We're not interested in success, we're interested in greatness. Right? And greatness is not so much bound up with, the attainment or the achievement of X, Y, and Z, right? It's about the quality of the life that's being lived. And if one's identity is bound up with that, right? And of course, it's always a kind of vexed question because you're grappling with what the nature of the vocation is. That you're not clear about that when you're 21 or when you're 32 or even when you're 55, right? You're still trying to get a sense of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But as you're trying to get a sense of what it means, you want to live fully in it, right? Or be fully present.
Yeah.
What about you?
So I think there's a tension, I think, for me. Because on the one hand, I have lived with a sense of urgency about feeling as though it is important to take advantage of certain kinds of opportunities that I've had that are out of the ordinary in order to provide materially. Right? So that's a piece of my conception of success, is that a certain kind of security, a certain kind of ability, and I know this is the case for you too, the ability to take care of folks.
Take care of my mom. Right.
But not be willing to do anything for that. Not just that, but also that the things that I do that offer some financial benefit, wanting to make sure they are consistent with the vocation.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets tricky because there's a lot to be gained from saying what people want to hear. People will pay for you to say what they want to hear. People will champion you. But if you actually have a critical relationship with the society where you can point out, this is actually undermining our communities, this is hurting us, this may not be the best way to analyze the, and I know that you do this work, right? So you in many ways are a model of this for me, to be willing to speak the truth in a way that can sometimes hit your pocket and hit your popularity, right? Is to me like that in some ways that's the challenge, is to tell the truth and how to tell the truth in a way that doesn't completely doesn't put you so far outside of the mainstream that nobody wants to listen to you. You can't take care of anybody, right? But I do think that that's complicated, right? Because we spend our lives reading and writing and analyzing the world and being in conversation with folks. And there's just a lot that is terrible about the world to describe. There's a lot of exploitation. There's a lot of cruelty. There's a lot of hustling. There's a lot. And if you it's like, how do you talk about it and not get totally demoralized? But also, how do you talk about it in a way that allows people to digest it so that you can do something about it? And not talk yourself out of a conversation, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, I think there's always the kind of looming challenge of the bribe.
Yeah, sure.
It always shadows our practice, right? And the bribe is, if you adjust yourself to the world as it is, these are the rewards that will follow. If you sound a certain way, right? Whether you're in, I'm going to produce a sound that is consonant with what the mainstream wants to hear, or, you're going to offer thoughts that are comforting to the current relations that define the world, the status quo, as it were. And the bribe is, you're going to do well. We'll take care of you if you do it at a certain level.
Yes.
Because it doesn't mean, not everybody can take the bribe, because not everybody
you have
is
to
good
be
at it.
Right, you have to be good at it.
Right. But, it seems like the looming shadow of, the question of, your guy, will you sell your soul for a mess of pottage, is always there.
And don't you think, I think maybe this era, it's complicated because there are multiple people willing to bribe you that can sometimes be opposing camps of folks.
Ooh,
Does that make sense? Right? So like there's the bribe. Do you know what I mean? Like there's the bribe of like, there's the bribes of the major political parties. There's the bribes of a certain kind of opposition. It's just kind of, there's the bribe of the kind of reality television type spectacle. There's the bribe of the assuaging white guilt. There's the bribe, like there's all these different ways. And if I speak in this way, this constituency will be satisfied and they'll get what they want. If I speak in this way, or even if I'm fire and brimstone in this way, there's there are almost archetypes of how to be a Black person in public that are compensated according to how well you fit in the archetype.
So how have you navigated that?
I think, letting my freak flag fly. Being...
Letting your what?
Freak flag fly. Obviously you're more dignified than have that formulation, but I think...
What does that mean? What does that mean?
To actually not be an archetype. To be trying to figure it out.
So
in real time with people.
So your work
is a refusal
to be boxed in?
It's a refusal to be boxed in. it's a willingness to say that which is not just unpopular, but doesn't fit what people anticipate what you're going to say or think or how you're going to think about something. Which sometimes, and I know you know this, it sometimes puts you in a position where everybody is kind of frustrated with you.
Where does that come from with you? Where would you, if you were to do a genealogy of that sensibility, of that orientation, where would you, how would you trace it? How would you mark it?
I mean, part of it is disposition. It is, my grandmother being like, that girl's so contrary, right? And that is it is wanting to be heard on my own terms. It is a dispositional thing to not be boxed in. Another is, it does have to do with a kind of intellectual training about, not just having someone explain to me. It comes out of being trained in cultural studies. It's not just, here's an explanation of how the world is, apply this explanation to read the world around you, but instead, let's observe the world and try to draw out what we can understand from our observation. And one of the things I often say is, I am very conscious about the spaces I go into as an intellectual, because I'm trying to see if what I think is true is actually true. And I can't do that unless I'm on the ground, right? And not just talking to people, but actually look, so when I go someplace, I want to know what kind of construction is happening, who's here, who's living on the street, who's living there, who's moving in and out, where are the police moving, or how are they operating in this space? A reading of the world doesn't tend to lend itself to doctrine so easily, which is not to say that I'm not, you've known me for a long time. I have had very doctrinal moments in my life, but I do think that there's value in reading, obviously books, but also to reading the world around.
Right.
Where's it come from in you? I mean, I know there's a pragmatist piece, but there's more.
Right. I mean, I could do an intellectual genealogy of it. I think more than anything, it is deeply rooted in Moss Point, Mississippi. It's about a certain kind of striving for authenticity, a kind of authenticity might not be the right word, but a particular way of being in the world, that is.
Is it honest? Decent?
Yeah, those are words that I'm reaching for, but I don't want to be cliche, There's a...
Real? It's a little hip hop.
Yeah, it's still too hip hop for me. But I think it's something about, right, what does it mean to feel uneasy in the world from the beginning? Okay. And how to live in that. Yeah. As an orientation. Right. And so oftentimes that's rooted in the kind of sense of unease growing up, right? Not unease in being in my own body, of course, but just
about the way the world,
my world was, right? And then how then does that, right, then orient me to things? So trying to understand what's in the gut. Right, because I was going to ask you this question, but I'm going to say, so there's something deeply personal that motivates me to turn to pragmatism, something deeply personal that drove me at Morehouse to Black nationalism. There's something deeply personal in the way in which, right, I find myself speaking in public.
So what I think is interesting about that, and this is why, tell me if you think this is the right word.
This should be liquor. No, go ahead.
Because I think of you as a seeker, because what's unusual, I think, is to be someone who is both, that kind of unease leads to a deep practice of observation and analysis. I think it's pretty unusual to be both that and also to be a person with a great deal of charisma, which is, I know that's not how you would not how you would self-describe it, to be when you're the person who's called to stand in front of people and help people understand things, right? And which I know started from a very young age for you. That is a kind of charisma. And I think it's the thing of being a seeker, right? You're looking at the world and you're seeing that something's not quite right, but you're also looking for solutions and wanting to achieve them with people. That's what brings you to a stage, right?
Right. And I think there's something in that is bound up with, right, that seeking that's bound up with kind of fear,
and courage.
And courage. Of course, the courage is
it goes along with the fear. Facing the fear. Yeah.
And it's this. I wanted to ask you this question. And I know we're kind of rambling for a second, but I want to get to something. You said this urgency. You used the word urgency when you began to answer the question. An urgency in relation to taking care of people.
Yeah.
But I want you to pause and linger there a little bit more. Urgency in terms of you.
Yeah. Oh.
Not in terms of taking care of others, but you. Say something a little bit more about this.
Oh, well, I mean, I think for me, the heart of the sense of urgency is being in my early 20s and facing the chronic illness and the sense of mortality that I felt at a very young age meant that it's not even a sense of not wanting to waste time, but I was not going to waste my gifts. My sense was if I have these gifts and I am here and I'm going to use them and when I am feeling the impulse to understand things, to try to explain them, to tell story, I just didn't feel like I couldn't waste that. So I do think it was feeling a sense of mortality quite young that produced a sense of urgency and
that urgency would allow you to work through pain.
Oh yeah.
Work through
excruciating pain. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's also the tradition. I mean, and I don't want to romanticize it, but I mean, all of our folks work through pain. We grew up with that. We grew up with people going to work every day, physically suffering, emotionally suffering. Psychologically, we witness that.
How does that show up in your work? So I mean, you could tell the story. We don't want to be romantic about it, right? You're right, but how does it show? How does it show up on the page?
It's beautiful, though. It shows up on the page. I try to tell it true. Like I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to account for it and also listen. I don't know. I know that's a sort of rambling way. It's not coherent, but I want to tell a story in a way that the aching of the arthritis, as it were, right? My own, but also my grandmother's, my mother's, that the aching of the arthritis,
yeah.
is not just described, but is evident even in the rhythm of the sentence. What is it? I mean, this is part of what we do in our music, right? Like when you can hear breath in the trumpet player, you can hear the exertion, right? This is when you can see the sweat. This is the hardest. This is James Brown, the hardest working. Like there is a struggle with. It's not just sort of, we talk about kind of these extraordinary moments of artistic achievement, but there's a tradition of taking into account pain and suffering in it. It's part of the genius. We're doing this, and when doing this, not just we can do this even with the pain and suffering, but it's an act of love for oneself, for one's people, to continue to do things that are extraordinary in the thick of the suffering.
Right. Because I asked the question because when I read you, I read you at the level of argument.
Yeah.
Right. So there are claims being made.
There's lots of argument, yeah. But there's also the formal piece.
There's the formal piece too, right? Where there's the form. But then there's the form actually comes to the reader, at least it comes to me as a reader, as felt.
Yes.
There's sentences in South to America. There's sentences in Breathe. There's sentences in Looking for Lorraine, right? That are, and we can, may we forever stand Yes, but
Less so, yeah.
But I'm just saying the arc of the work. There's the sentences that are making claims that are working on several different levels.
That's very deliberate.
And it's very deliberate. So talk a little bit about, for me at least, I'm trying to get at something, because you said the urgency that has everything to do with the sense of mortality, right? That has everything to do with taking care of folk, which has everything to do with one's sense of calling and vocation. And for you, particularly being located in this tradition that you're constantly claiming, that you're constantly delving deeper into its contours in some ways. But when I read you now, it's actually much more explicit on the page.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but I don't know how many years ago this was. Maybe it's been maybe 13. Nah, maybe not quite that many. Maybe 11 years ago. You're really pushing me to get out of drawing these clean distinctions between intellect and emotion.
Cornell's old office. Yes. In Stanhope Hall.
That's right. And I was talking about how important it was for me. I wanted to think about the emotional register. And I was being, in some ways, very dismissive of...
This is early stages of Vexit.
Yes. And you were like, that distinction doesn't hold, right? And you were talking about Cartesian anxieties and stuff that was... it wasn't all above my head, but you were actually delving into a philosophical tradition, explaining to me why that distinction I was making was a product of a kind of training I had had as a scholar, but didn't have to be. Mm-hmm. And that was really helpful for me, because what it allowed for me to do was to actually think about the way in which, I think this is true in general, but thought is so... It has a sensory component. It always has an emotional component, and to try to be honest about that, and to actually use that as part of my craft as a writer, because oftentimes you can connect to people emotionally, and they will come with you intellectually if you connect with them emotionally, and they can, and it is a way of it provides a way of understanding, right? So, and I use this example all the time with the sugar, with the way. The way that we love sugar, and in the South, and that you can have an analytic about what sugar does to your body, and it's addictive, and this sort of in the industry and the like. But then there's also how it feels. It soothes when you feel, beaten down and exhausted and diminished. And so if there's a way to get to that, as a way of understanding why economic exploitation is so terrible, right? That's what I want. That's what I want to get to. I want to convince people, but I want to convince people through the gut, and even more than the heart, through the gut.
It's like that moon pie. The moon pies. And the miners, right?
Yes.
In South America, absolutely.
Yeah.
So. I know this is not an interview of you, but I got to ask.
Because I am about to ask you a question, but yes, okay.
Okay, but I have to ask you this question, though. Given the urgency, given the arc, the kind of the sensory nature of the sentence on the page, given the world in which you're writing all of this stuff, what are you most afraid of now? What is the fear at the heart?
Oh, see, right. I'm a crybaby, so I'm going to try to answer this without crying.
Yes, you are.
I am afraid that I don't know what to offer young people now. And what I mean is, I don't, it's the cascade, it's the backlash, it's the Trump era, it's the COVID, it's the institutions, the world has been cruel, but the environmental threat, the political threat, the ways, the fracturing, I feel very concerned about how to be useful for helping them think about the way forward after we're gone. That terrifies me. Because as someone who thinks so much in terms of tradition, as someone who thinks so much about what elders taught, who thinks so much about how do we pass things on, it's very hard for me to understand what's going on now. Does that make sense?
Say more. That, by the way, the clock didn't stop.
Oh, okay.
Start. Say more.
Like, do you know, I mean, I feel like, and this, I'm going to turn this on you, but I feel like, you know, the era in which we came of age, which is often in some ways dismissed as an era of kind of organizing, but there was a lot of organizing. We did a lot of sort of thinking about a variety of issues, right?
Right.
And to do so with the shadow of the civil rights generation always over us, right? And to try to think, how do we think about these things, or how do we organize ourselves? What I mean is, I don't know about whether the appeals to justice have whether people will be moved by them. And even if they are, because the power is concentrated in such a small number of people's hands, wealth and power and weapons, the sense of the possibility of turning a tide feels more remote to me now than any point in history. And that feels terrifying to me. Because then you don't know, like, I don't know what to say. Do you say resist when it's like, when you feel like, wait a minute, they could all be obliterated? That's literally how I feel. And I don't know, and I didn't feel like that 20 years ago. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. Is that despair?
I don't think it's...
That's not despair. It's just terrifying.
Despair. It is... It's confusion.
Well, I know that feeling, yeah.
Right? Because I don't know what we do. Like, you know, it's always... And obviously, every time you have a strategy, you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. We can try, but I mean, do you share any of that feeling, or is it? No, absolutely. It's not a fear that, it's not a fear that I don't know what to offer. Okay.
Or what to give, right? That's not really.
That's not your, yeah.
It's my fears. I don't know if it matters. You know, the cumulative effect of it all. You know, when Baldwin was very clear that we don't have the luxury of despair. So even when cancer is eating him up, he says, you can only go to Texas so many times, you feel like a broken motor, saying the same thing over and over and over again. And these folk are still going to be white folk, on a certain level. And, and you see it, and we're living in it. We're living in it and against the backdrop of cascading betrayals. And our children and their children are growing up in it. And they're growing up against the backdrop of a world of a planet that is screaming. They're growing up. They're seeing genocide daily.
Yeah.
So you get to your study, you do the solitary work that the writing requires of you. You get there, you sit down, and you wonder, well, does this matter?
Right.
Does this matter? And so then you have to find a different kind of motivation for the writing. We always tell each other, right? Tell each other all the time when we get in our moments when the bribe is beating us down. Like, we're not writing for this moment. We're just writing for generations, right? And so you have to find a different kind of motivation, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Right? Because you keep trying to give an account.
Right.
I keep trying to give an account. I keep trying to give an account of these people.
Right.
I keep trying to give an account of us in relation to these people. I keep trying to give an account of democracy and why it matters, why we should be committed to it. I keep trying to give an account, and they keep being who they are.
But you still believe in democracy.
Have to.
Do you feel like is a choice or an article of faith?
It's
Do you see what I'm
both.
saying? Is it an investment or is it something that you just think this is?
I choose it as an article of faith.
Okay.
Right? It's where I turn my spade. I have this fundamental belief, and it has something to do with, Ruby Wilson and Russell Wilson and Herman Glaude and Bernice Glaude and my family. It has something to do with ordinary people having the capacity to have a say in how they live their lives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? That we're not just, to use Emerson's language, just simply sacks and stomachs. Mm-hmm. That we don't need to be moved about by others. Right? And so we have the capacity, the wherewithal to build a life that is good. And and I think democracy as a form of social arrangement, governmental arrangement, right, is the best system we have so far.
Does it exist? Is it breathing? And if so, where do you see it? You know what I mean? Because there are some people who are believe in it, but don't believe that we've achieved it ever. Some people believe we achieve it in ways that are fleeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, that question can be asked in a number of different venues, right? Just like, where do you see the Christian? Where is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where's the Christian?
Yeah. I think it's very similar.
Right. Where is the communist? We've never seen communism before. That's the way in which people, apologize for Stalin. That wasn't communism, right? Right.
Yes, I grew up with that.
Right. So I think, as flawed as American democracy is, right? As flawed as it is.
It is.
It is.
Okay.
Right. And so part of what I've been trying to do is to stand in a tradition in which Black folk have thought about its meaning, mm-hmm. right, from within it, not within America as such, but within the precepts and the values and commitments that democracy commends.
So this is correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what it means to be, for you to be a pragmatist, right? It is the conditions being what they are.
Right.
How do we function democratically?
And this is something you said earlier, right? And when you said it, it just reminded me that you're an artist, that you're a novelist, that you're a writer at the heart, right? That part of the way in which we think about democracy, we have to think about it close to the ground.
Yeah.
Right? Not up here, not in the abstraction. Yeah. John Dewey says democracy is a way of life. It's not just simply processes and procedures, right? It's a way of life which affirms the dignity and standing of everyday ordinary people, right? Who have the ability, the capability, the means, if we so choose, right, to build a life in which everyone not only could dream dreams, but can make those dreams a reality. That's what Dewey meant by effective freedom. Yeah. So for me, when I get into this, when I'm in the study, what I'm most afraid of in this moment, right, is that this is a wrap. To put it in crude terms, the biggest challenge for me, and it's not the fad that it is, right? It's the challenge that has always faced us, I think, since we stepped on these shores, since we were brought here. And that is the challenge of pessimism, the challenge of what Du Bois called it, the temptation, not of despair, but doubt. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? Remember, temptation of hate is the adolescent temptation. Temptation of despair, but doubt. Am I throwing pearls before swine? It's the Crummel's judgment of Black folk. Right? Have we and this is not me judging us, but is the situation such?
We should just, yeah.
And then the bribe is sitting on the shoulder. Yeah. So how do you intervene in that? How do you muster the will, the insight, the power to face those headwinds, right? To speak to it, to speak in it. That's my fear.
Can I add another layer of fear on that?
No, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Because I think that that's so poignant and pointed. And as you were talking, I'm thinking about, then you have thousands upon thousands, and I'm speaking to you specifically, of Black folks waiting to hear your guidance and your words, right? And so there's also this other layer of responsibility, right? So there's you want to offer an account, but there's also people want you to represent them and to testify to our story.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is another layer of responsibility, right? Because the responsibility is not just, part of the responsibility is speaking for us, right? It's a sort of lobbying sensibility, but also it feels good when someone tells the truth about us, right? And so then I just wonder how that valence adds another layer, right? Because it's like, you know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, this is somebody who, you know, it makes us feel good to see you and to see what you've achieved. Like, it feels in a world that is constantly beating us down.
You know, we've been together, we've been doing this journey for a long time, and we both love it when folk come up to us, older folk, and baby, we're so proud of you.
Sure, yes.
You know, it's just one. You just keep doing what you're doing.
Or when the babies do.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, but you know, we also are students of history, and you know, you bear witness as you want to do. And today, people are proud of you, and tomorrow they won't be.
Right.
You know, today you're on the cover of Time magazine, and tomorrow you're the most despised man on the planet.
Right.
You know, Baldwin in 1963 was on the cover of Time. By the time 1987 rolled around, people were more interested in Cosby's sweaters than they were in listening to him talking about them babies murdered in Atlanta.
See, this is so important because timelines.
Yeah.
We forget those coincided.
You see? Right there?
The Cosby Show and the children being killed in
Atlanta. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We were so focused on that brownstone and those sweaters and Claire Huxtable and those children.
And the representation. See, that's
exactly.
Representation making us feel good.
So you're right. You're right.
Oh, it's hard.
Yeah, you're right. It's wonderful. You know you're saying something right, but you know, then you get caught up in that. You get caught up in that, and then you lose sight of what you're really supposed to be doing. And what we're supposed to be doing is what we do when we sit down at the in our studies alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that is confronting the fear, being vulnerable, trying our best to bring the full weight of our bibliography to bear on the subject at hand. For me, trying to transition, which you've helped me do, transition from the straitjacket of our training, academic training, into a kind of writing that can tap the depth of the emotion that informs why we came to do this stuff in the first place. Right? And what follows from that follows from it. Because today, you know, everybody's excited to see me, and tomorrow nobody will give a damn.
But I want to sit in that space though for a little bit longer. People
why?
be excited to see you because that's an important function. You know, I mean, I think that there's something that we need, and by we I mean Black folks. We need to witness about ourselves. That I think intellectuals and artists serve a different function than politicians and entertainers in that respect. And it's not just, yes, there's the educational function, but it's also about how to be, right? Like, it's also about how to actualize as a person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. It's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because of the medium, right? It's one thing if it's
face to face.
It's
in the book, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's when South to America wins the National Book Award and you get up and you said Alabama girl to Birmingham girl, and everybody in that crowd from the South knew exactly what you were saying, and there was this pride emanating. It's an unmediated moment in some ways, and what I mean by unmediated, because of course you have the National Book Award folk, and that's whatever that organization is all about. But television,
right? Yes, it's
different.
Particular medium.
Yes. It's a particular medium.
Yeah.
Right. So what does it mean to do public intellectual work through that form, right? And the fact that people see you, right? And what is that cathartic experience like, right? It's like, you remember when I was in undergrad, Farrakhan was making his way across HBCUs. And we would
across a whole bunch of students.
Right,
schools. He came to mine, came to Yale.
I know, and he would come and he would speak for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And he would light folk up.
Yes.
And it would be this cathartic experience. Black folk he told the truth. And then we would go back into our worlds. Nobody was joining the nation.
Well, this is Martin Gilson wrote a piece about
right.
it.
Nobody was joining the nation.
He did this study. He was like, do Black people really believe what Farrakhan is saying? Right? And no, the answer. But there was something very powerful about hearing him.
So I take your point about, there's something we need to hear from the entertainer, from the intellectual. I understand it. Mm-hmm. There's something cathartic about, in a world where it seems like we can't be, that we see somebody actually being.
Okay.
So I get that.
Okay, but I'm pushing
but
back
I'm worried. I'm worried about it.
But I'm pushing so we talk about television because you've been on television
a lot.
And you entered into that space very differently from anybody else. And I will say, and you will probably remember this, I was cautious about you being on TV so much.
It's true.
And I was like, be careful. You get your time of writing in. Don't do this too much, right?
Right.
But what you did was you figured out how to manage the time and to still, in a way that allowed you to still be an intellectual. There was nobody, so you do these citations, right? Baldwin, Whitman, Emerson, Baker. You would cite people and bring, so there's always these texts that are present. So you could say something in a concise fashion, but you pointed people to things to read all the time. You've always pointed, and did not, and shift the terms of the conversation. So not quite catharsis in that, but modeling a relationship to being a person who is engaged in the political world, right? So that it's not just, am I going to vote for this policy or that, but what do I read to help me make decisions about how I'm going to be as a citizen? How can I think about these issues differently than the terms set by the major political parties? Those kinds of, and to me, that's different. And maybe this is also just my disinclination to, I don't share much with Farrakhan in terms of the way that he sees the world, although
Right.
I do think he's very charismatic. But I do think that it's not catharsis so much as, I don't know, like, I guess I think there's something really valuable about being able to imagine what it is to be a learned person, what does it mean to be an intellectually and politically engaged person that's not about necessarily the job, but about, like you said before, the vocation, how you're going to live your life.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. In the context of discussion around fear, one still wonders.
Sure.
And then you find yourself in the in these moments where you've seen me, where I'm wringing my hands. They haven't called me.
Sure.
What does that mean? And you get caught up in it and all of this other stuff. So I think it's we're all too human at the end of the day.
Right, yeah.
But I think this question of will we be able to give the next generation resources? Will it matter? Both speak to the nature of the problem that you and I are having trouble wrapping our minds around. Trying to find descriptive language. Right? When I read you, particularly the new book that's coming out, we won't talk about the particulars.
I didn't talk about it.
Give them the title again.
Black and Blues.
Black and Blues. It's your insistence on loving us, and in so many ways showing how we've managed in the midst of the absurd, in the midst of all of this ugliness, to live beautifully.
Yes.
To live powerfully over time. How do we take this category, which was imposed on us, and the us is differentiated, it's nuanced, how do we take this category and do what we've done with it? Right? It's a marvelous account.
Thank you.
In relation to now. I mean, we're still doing beautiful things, I suppose. Right? For some reason I'm getting worried because I'm sounding like an Afro-pessimist, and I'm not, because that's a different claim.
No, you don't sound like an
But you see what I mean?
No, it's well, I mean, I think it's an answer. I mean, I think in different ways, both of us in the work that we're doing now are responding to the pessimist claim, right? Which is that, it's a wrap. There's the
whole thing is predicated upon anti-blackness and da-da-da-da. Yeah.
And I'm not a pessimist, I'm not a universalist, but what I do believe deeply is that, European empires decided to make this thing called black, right? Black people, put us in this category where all these different cultures and languages and identities, they put us in this category. Many of us have spent many years fighting against that category in various ways and differentiating between ourselves. But inside the category, with all of the imposition of violence and disdain and degradation, the beauty is actually, to create beauty in that is actually the highest human achievement. It's not a universalist claim, but it's something about what is so fundamentally human, and that's why the entire world is captivated by our imaginations. Right? So I was telling students the other day, everywhere I go in the world, and I'm sure you turn on the radio, you hear us. We have captivated the world because we figured out how to create incredible beauty. And that is the apex of the human condition. That's what I believe.
And you do this through the color blue.
Yes.
What that mean? The hell?
Well, because we're all, the blues. No. Well, because you can tell, part of it is the blues, because it's a blues story.
Right.
A blues sensibility.
Right.
I want to pick up what both Albert Murray and Amiri Baraka did with Sense of Blues people, and also kind of correct them both.
Right.
I don't think they're either got it exactly right. They both are a little too invested in their political arguments and less in the account
You're
of what
still
the blues
beefing
does.
with Murray, I see.
I'm always beefing with Murray.
Yeah.
But I'm beefing with Murray because I adore him. I'm beefing
right.
with Baraka in a little bit different way.
Exactly.
But it's the work of joy. It's a work of joy that doesn't deny. It's not suffering is almost not the right word. I think it's humiliation and degradation. It's more than suffering.
Right.
Because it's the diminishment that just makes you, as to borrow your language, want to eat your entrails.
Right.
That when you create, which is different than just suffering, because it's when you turn that around, you have done something marvelous.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
See, this is the thing for me. I'm neither a pessimist nor an optimist.
Thank goodness.
I'm a meliorist.
Oh, wait, say that again?
I'm not a pessimist. I'm neither a pessimist or an optimist. I'm a meliorist. So I don't believe, that the world is, just hell. And I don't believe in, this is, the best of all possible worlds. I believe it is all up to what we do. It's the choices we make while we're here. This is what makes my current moment so challenging.
Say more.
Because it's in our hands. So going back to our fears, right? So when you're trying to write on the page, you're trying to give an account. For me, I'm always giving an account. The arc of the work is a kind of presentist moment. How does this story, right? How does this historical account prophesy a present?
Yeah.
Right? How does this present, this history give me an account of the way in which I'm moving about in the world? How do I fund the experiences in such a way so that we can make intelligent choices now, in this moment, right? How do I give us resources to imagine differently? This relationship to tradition as we're thinking, about future possibility, right? So this is what I'm trying to do in the work, at least on the page. And so here I am, does it matter? So if I'm not a pessimist, which saying that it's all settled, if I'm not an optimist, saying that it's all the arc of the universe bends toward,
it's really
it's up to us.
Right. Whether it matters is a really big question.
Becomes a fundamental question.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, so because if it has to always matter for me to get up. It has to always matter for me not to choose to drown myself in drink.
Yeah.
It has to always matter so that I don't get lost in selfish pursuits.
Yeah.
Right. And so but I think the question has to always be asked, though. It has to always be asked. And here I'm kind of backtracking a little bit in the sense that if you don't ask the question whether or not it matters, then you open yourself up to hubris.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Then you think you got the answer. You think you know it. You can be susceptible to those ideological, guarantees, as it were. But I'm conflating something here. But I think, on the one hand, it's a really deep existential dread.
Yeah.
Given the nature of the moment.
So can I ask you?
Sure.
Does the mattering though mean, when you say you're an ameliorationist, which I love?
Right.
Does it matter? Does the question, does it matter? Is that a forward-looking question, or can it be a living in the along question?
Ooh, Gwendolyn Brooks, living in the along. I think it's both. Both hand. Right? Because for me as a pragmatist, the past, the present, and the future are always kind of in the moment, right? They're both, they're all three there, right? So the choices made in the going along, right? The close to the groundwork that's being done, right, always has implications for the future that we may inhabit, that we might inhabit, right? The future as we imagine it serves as regulative ideals for the kinds of choices we make, right? So if I don't have a robust understanding of how we might live together, then what are the regulative ideals that guide my choices in the current
to get right? Yeah, that's right.
to get to that?
Yeah.
Right? So the future is always implicated in the going along. Oh, we're gonna make do. Well, what are we making do for? We're not making do just to make do. We're making do for the day when we're gonna have meat in this pot.
Right. Right.
That's why the pinto beans taste so good without it.
Oh, it's just a little.
Yeah, a little bit, So you see what I mean? So it's in the going along. So I think it's both and, they're always together for me. That's why I'm so obsessed with history, and I'm so obsessed with history's relevance to our current moment, because it informs and shapes how I imagine the future.
So I want to throw in then the pessimist. Maybe it's not just pessimists.
Yeah,
it's also leftists, right? In general, who will say, well, in various ways, but for the circumstance of a small group of the Black bourgeois, things have not changed for Black folks. And we'll say, and that becomes the indictment, right?
Right.
And you don't understand that because of the position that you occupy. But by and large, if you look at how many, and then the statistics about incarceration, about poverty, about life expectancy, all those sorts of things. And so the argument comes down to all of these efforts in the past have been treading water. So I don't actually agree with that.
I was about to say
at all. And I think it'd be very hard to come, and it'd be very hard to come from where we come from and agree with that.
Yeah.
Frankly. But people say that. And I'm just wondering how you engage that question beyond, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And
what is underneath it?
Well, empirically it's wrong.
Sure.
Right? The circumstances of my great-grandfather are not the circumstances of my cousin.
Right.
Right. Even though my cousin has done time in Parchment.
Sure.
They're just not the same. It's just not the same material circumstances, right? That doesn't mean that one is better than the other.
It's different.
It's just different, right? And that's, I think, it's really important to understand. One could be catching hell, and hell is the noun that allows us, or the adjective that allows us to describe the experience across time. But that doesn't mean the hell is the same.
Same hell, right?
It's the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think this gets us to the historical or historicist sensibility that we have, right? Right? What the nature of Black suffering in the context of slavery is not the nature of Black suffering in the context of Jim Crow.
Absolutely not.
They're not the same.
Yes.
They're just not the same. And you
and
taught
the question
me this.
is better almost hampers the pressure to look for forward progress hampers our understanding of, I think, the imaginative work of white supremacy, the way that it reinvents itself.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And you make this point. You make this point so powerfully, right? That the way in which we often invoke history in these moments right, arrest the imagination. Say a little bit more about that.
No, I mean, I and I've gotten in trouble at various moments for saying this. But I don't know that, I don't think, and I understand there's some very prominent, brilliant, important thinkers. So I'm not attacking them, but I don't think it's particularly useful to talk about mass incarceration as Jim Crow or slavery. I don't think they're this, and part of the reason is that when we do that, we're less attentive to the mechanisms for the ways in which they control and produce suffering, and also less attentive to the ways in which we might avoid them or respond to them. Right? And so it's not, so I know that people like to think in terms of analogies. People like anniversaries, people like analogies. It helps, right? It's a kind of
intellectual shorthand.
Yes, intellectual shorthand. It's kind of that bounded rationality people can make it. But I do think that it has the side effect of people say, it's all the same. But when you say it's all the same, you actually don't fully know what's going on, right? You don't fully know what's going on. Incarceration is a horrifying tool for managing poverty and labor. It has its own logics, right? That I think need to be talked about on their own terms. So for me, it's things like that's it. Why I resist that. It's all the same kind of account.
Yeah.
And it also is different. And I guess it's also like. You think about what it means to be that we are literate and people incarcerated are literate and we have there is oppression, but there are also all of these tools at our disposal and all of this history and tradition at our disposal that I hate the idea of dismissing all of that abundance.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. How does one strike the delicate balance between a kind of piety towards
the
past and an irreverent orientation toward it, so that you might release
let's
yourself.
talk about that.
So that you might release yourself into a different kind of imagining, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I was going to ask you. I mean, I think it's hard, right? Especially because, you know, we have these, you know, we have lived under the shadow of the greatest generation, which for Black folks is maybe not the World War II generation, but the Civil Rights Movement generation,
exactly.
right? They're our greatest generation, and they are always telling us what they did and how they did it. What's fascinating is when you're around them and you're like, how y'all are disorganized? How did y'all do all that?
We were raised by them. We're not millennials. We were raised by them.
We were raised by them, right? And and they were, you know, extraordinary. But I also think the world was you know, we're in a completely different circumstance,
right?
In so many different ways. The political economy is different,
right?
Politics are, you know, the major parties have taken different positions. The relationship to the rest of the world, we are in a kind of weirdly post and neo-colonial world, different from the decolonizing world. Social media is different. Media, you know, it's a media consolidation. There's so much is different that I think we can't. So for me, the funny example is always, and I say this all the time, is every time, you know, there's infighting. This is more when millennials are fighting with each other politically, millennial organizers. And they're like, so-and-so is an agent. It's an FBI agent. And you're like, we don't need that anymore. There's surveillance over everything. You don't need any people infiltrating. People can see everything on your phone, right? Because they're using old-fashioned frames of reference. We have to be more sophisticated, even as we can learn from their, I think what we learn from is that their observation, like with Bob Moses, right? When he talked about, he was such a careful observer. And then tried to figure out, okay, how do you negotiate with these four? That to me is the lesson. Not to repeat the same strategy.
Yeah. Right? And I think I take it to an even more personal level.
Yeah.
You know, so at the level of politics, right, you're absolutely right. Right, that there's a certain way history can be invoked, particularly the civil rights, the mid-20th century, which is historically is an anomaly.
Yeah.
It doesn't, historically, the mid-20th century.
It's different from other, yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. And when you think about the arc of American history, right? It's just so unique and unusual on so many levels. But it becomes the norm in some ways. It becomes the standard by which one thinks about movement and thinks about struggle, right? It's like thinking about the Warren Court as representative of the Supreme Court. Makes no sense given the role of the court. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. So to think about it personally, though, what does it mean for us to have been born under the shadow of the greatest generation, right? You know, like I have my goatee as a symbol, as a homage to Malcolm, right? I wish, I'm born out of place and time. If I was
belatedness,
right? Yes. If I was in the 1960s, I would have been standing post with Malcolm, serving breakfast with the Black Panther Party. I would have been, yes. I would have been, in the midst of it all, right? But no, I've come of age in the age of Reagan, right? And so what does it mean to kind of feel this sense of belatedness, this longing, right? And then find yourself in a posture of imitation, in a posture of supplication.
To them, yeah.
To them. And then what happens to your imagination in that space? Then suddenly, the only thing you start doing is just we're gonna march. I'm gonna,
marching thing.
This marching. Or I'm gonna, what I remember when I was younger and I was doing public speaking, I had the rhythm of Malcolm. I could do it. Mm-hmm. I could get going. How would he say? Who are they to compare yourself to? Mm-hmm. Why your hair looks like gold next to their hair, Why your skin, your skin looks like gold next. Why would you want to be compared to that stringy hair thing, right? So rhetorically, you find yourself in that space, and what happens is the imagination is arrested.
Yeah.
And so the particularity of your moment is obscured because you're too busy giving yourself over, committing suicide by way of imitation.
Ooh.
Right?
And that's a word.
That's Emerson. Right?
And you.
Yeah, you know, so this delicate relationship, balance between tradition and self-creation, right? How does one show an indebtedness to the past, right? As one, right? As one try to, as desperate as the moment may seem now, speak to the particulars, right, of our current troubles, you know. How does one, you know, show the requisite piety and irreverence, right? That, you know, to be able to tell the old people who try to tell us what to do, no, y'all need to just go and sit down now. And let us
you
do
can
this.
tell them that. I'm not.
No, but you know, you think about it. And the thing is that they, you know, oftentimes they get mad at us, but that's what SNCC did.
They absolutely did, and yet they seem to have forgotten that.
That's what they did.
Well, you know, SNCC people are always giving me jobs to do.
You know,
They give me,
you're one of them SNCC
like,
babies.
you're supposed to be, and I'm like, I'm not even in the state. What's happening? Right? Yes, there's lots of jobs, but yeah, no, I think that's. But I love the way that you said that, because I think in some ways that brings us to the question we began with, because part of what you're describing is a sense, an awareness of tradition, right? And a kind of, and even a sense of a kind of fidelity to it in its substance, and also, and a commitment to community, and a commitment to one's people, but also the self-actualization piece, right? Because when you're talking about not reducing oneself, not committing suicide by imitation, you are actually, that's the self-actualization, that's the self-creation, right? Which I think is another piece. And I will say, as a movement baby, the part of the pressure to not, and it's a movement baby, but also as a Southern child, don't think too much of yourself, right? Don't get too big for your britches.
Your britches.
You're supposed to. So the one hand is care about the community, do for the people. On the other hand, don't get a big head. Those pressures can also make it hard to get to the point where you understand how important it is to self-actualize as part of understanding what your contribution is going to be. And I think that's something that that's something I feel confident imparting to young people. That's something to teach them.
You know, it's just difficult. And I know, you know, we got to bring it coming to the end of here, but that's the difficult part, because, you know, you impart it in this moment and it gets caught up in the solution of the kind of narcissism of you know, this self-therapeutic moment that then everything is so inwardly concerned, and, you know, other regarding gets lost, and you just simply preoccupied with self-creation. And hold up, what happened to justice here? What happened to building, you know, what happened to the pursuit of the common good? What happened to building the beloved community? Because, you know, so it becomes a dangerous moment when you say, okay, self-creation is critical in this moment. I think it's a form of politics, actually. Right? Self-creation in pursuit of justice is a form of politics.
Oh, I love that.
And what do I mean by, I get this out of the tradition, right? So when the enslaved dares to steal literacy, to steal the written word, and to write herself into existence, just to a sonnet.
Yeah.
And that becomes an expression of who she is over and against the world that says she can be nothing but chattel. And she does it. That act, right, becomes an announcement, right? I am not what the world says I am. I am not lost in this particular generalization about who we are, right? I am me. I am what I am, you know, to use Ellison's language, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
right? So then, but to do that, to understand that to do that requires a different kind of world. So I can't be fully me in a world that declares that I'm less than. So in order for me to be fully me, in order for me to engage in the self-creation requisite to actualize my full potential, I have to work to create a world so now self-creation is in what? The service of justice.
See, I love this because for many reasons, but I love it part because for me, it answers what is often uncomfortable for me about Afrofuturism. Because I'm like, okay, so what's different, right? The person who imagined the enslaved person who imagined freedom is a futurist, right? What's it, right? Like it's imagination. What's it, right? But this is, I love the sort of weaving together that which one does under the conditions of captivity, in relation to the conditions of captivity, right? What one does under the conditions in relation, and then also with community in relation to the captivity. Those pieces for me, they have to be together for it to feel, yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a narcissistic preoccupation.
Right. Or it's just the fantasy of the future.
Right.
Because we have to live, right? Because this is what I feel like I'm always saying. People had to live. They were born, lived, and died enslaved, and they still lived. Right? People still lived locked up. People, right? And so to render that as nothing, which is sort of the Afro-pessimist sensibility,
absolutely.
I think is indecent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.